Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the C++ guy, and what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about files, but before we can talk about files, we have to talk about file systems. So that's what the first video is going to be in this series of files, and then after that we're going to actually talk about creating files. But what is a file system? What are files? What is a storage device? We're going to go through a lot of that today, and we're going to do it on Windows and Linux. We're going to do it on Windows first and then Linux. Now, if you're a Windows only user and you want to skip the Linux stuff, that's your decision, but the Linux part has a lot more features than the Windows does. Windows really just looks at Windows file systems, where Linux looks at just about every file system out there, short of the Apple file system, APFS, but we're going to get into all that. And to do that, I have this external hard drive, and these are so cheap these days. I think this is a 4 terabyte one, and I think it costs like maybe $100 or something at Costco. I could be wrong. It might be a little bit more. But these are so inexpensive. You don't need to get a big one for this to practice this, but this is really a set of skills that you might want, maybe not might, you do want to practice as to what happens when you connect a hard drive or a storage device. It could be an SSD, it could be a tape drive, it could be a diskette, anything. And how do you get ready to write files to it? And you might say, well, what in the heck do I have to worry about files? Well, if you've written a single program, you've created a file. You've created the source file. And when you compile it and link it, it creates the object file and the executable. So let's do this on Windows first, and then we're going to do it on Linux. And again, don't cheat yourself. Don't skip the Linux part, because there's a lot more in the Linux part, because Windows just doesn't have this capability without spending some money. So let's get going. Okay, so you see I've got Windows here. I'm going to take this hard drive. And actually, I have Windows running in a VMware guest operating system on my Mac Pro. And what it's going to do, and you may or may not see this, but what it's going to do is it's going to ask me if I want to connect it to my Windows guest or if I want to connect it to my Mac. I'm going to connect it to Windows. Now, this is a hard drive that was originally prepared by the manufacturer to be, you can use it right away, but what if you need to get it ready for a different operating system? What if you need to securely erase it? What if you need to do that? Well, you have to do a thing called partitioning it. You have to do a thing called formatting it. And if you want to learn how a hard disk drive works, or an SSD works, or even a diskette or a CD-ROM, there are millions of videos out there on how those work, better than I could produce, because they actually show the hard drive spinning, and they show the sectors and all that. So we're not going to go into that, but it's definitely something you should look at. So how do we actually mess with this hard drive? Now that we've got it connected to Windows, how do we actually mess with it? Well, if you see right here, I've got my C drive, and let's talk about that first. On Windows, they allocate devices on a letter colon name. They name it letter colon, and then there's also maybe an English or a whatever language that you know. It'll have some kind of a name in it. And if you see right here, we have the C disk and we have the D disk. The D disk is the DVD drive. Well, where's that hard drive I just connected? Where is it? Well, it's not prepared yet. We have to prepare it to actually use it. So we're going to do that on Windows, and then again on Linux. So let's get it ready again, and we're gonna see what's involved in this. Okay, so I'm going to close that down. Now on Windows, to do this, you right-click on this PC. Now this is Windows 11. If you're on Windows 10 or before, you might actually see a Manage option in the pop-up menu, but on Windows 11 you don't. So I'm going to click on Show More Options, and I'm going to click on Manage. Now what this does is this brings up the computer management application, and you've got a number of different things you can pick. I'm going to pick storage, so I double click on that. I'm going to double click on disk management for local. And what it's going to do is, this is actually a really nice display. What it's going to do is it's going to show all of your drives here. It kind of gives you some information, but down here on the bottom it gives you a lot more. So you can see on our disk 0, that is a device, and each one of these little things here is what they call a partition. A partition is a separation or a division of the overall hard drive into separate logical groups. And they look like multiple hard drives on your computer when they're actually only one. So you've got the physical hard drive, and then you divide that into partitions. And why do they do that? Well, maybe you want one half of the partition to be for an Apple Mac, another half to be for Windows. Maybe you want to have half for Windows and a quarter for Mac and a quarter for Linux. You can do that by separating it into partitions. You can see that. Right here is the hard drive that I just plugged in, and as you can see, it's unallocated. So before we can write any code to it, and you notice it doesn't have a disk, a letter, like you can see right here, we have the C drive here. That's our main Windows drive. But right here we've got nothing. It's just unallocated space. So Windows makes this pretty easy. I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to say New Simple Volume. And we could do a whole video on all these other spanned and striped and mirrored. These are different ways to protect your data in case of a hardware problem. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to go ahead and make what we call a simple volume. And Windows makes this pretty easy. You just go ahead and click Next. And you specify the size of your simple volume. And this right here looks like it's 3,815 megabytes. What I'm going to do is I want to do half for Windows and half for Linux, because I'm a huge Linux user and developer, and you should be too. So that's 3. Now you can do some calculations here. 38. I'm going to say 19. So 190,000. And that's actually 1.9 terabytes, 190,000. And I'm going to go ahead and click Next. It asks me what letter I want to assign it to. So I can pick a drive letter, and that's how Windows differentiates one drive from another, is a drive letter. So I'm just going to leave it what the default was. I'm going to say Next. And now it asks me, okay, what do you want to format it as? So the very first part, the first couple of windows that we just looked at, that was partitioning it. That was dividing it up into how big of a partition do we want to make. We're going to leave the rest unallocated. Now we need to format it for a certain file system. And that's where it kind of gets maybe not confusing, but there's a lot of options out there, right? Well, Windows only shows you 2. They show you NTFS, which is the NT Next Technology or New Technology file system. Then they have the EXFAT, which stands for External File Allocation Table file system. And NTFS is what Windows comes with. If you buy a new computer, if you install Windows brand new, it's always going to format everything in NTFS. It's a very advanced file system. It actually came from OS2, from IBM and Microsoft working together. And it's been enhanced. It's a really good file system. EXFAT is for an external drive. It's for like what I've got right here. I've got my external hard drive. So I'm going to go ahead and select EXFAT, and I'm going to give it a name. So you don't have to give it a name, but I'm going to just call it external EXFAT. Oh, notice that it only lets me type in a certain number of characters. EXFAT has that limitation. If I go and I select NTFS, watch what I can do. I can make it a whole lot longer. So NTFS is more advanced. EXFAT is more compatible with previous versions of Windows. So which should you use? Well, if your computer is only going to use Windows, always, you want to use NTFS. However, if you want to take your hard drive to somebody else's computer, maybe a Mac will read NTFS file systems, but it won't write to them unless you purchase an add-on file system program on your Mac, and most people don't do that. So it's okay for reading. So if you don't ever plan on writing to it when you go to your friend's house and put them on their Mac, then that's okay. NTFS is still okay. However, if you do plan on taking it to another computer, maybe your own Linux, you may want to change it to EXFAT, and then you have to give it a name that's short. So I'm just going to say 2 terabyte EXFAT. And now you also have an option of performing a quick format. Now, or a not quick format. Now, first of all, what is a format? Well, what it does is it takes the partition and it separates it into equal size sectors, or in this case, allocation unit sizes. And it's kind of like having a file cabinet with a whole bunch of file folders in it, right? Each folder is the same size. Though each folder might have more information in it, but each one is pretty much the same size. Not a great analogy, but it kind of gives you an idea of what it is. So an allocation unit size, and you can pick anything you want. I always like to leave it at default, and unless you've got some special need to do that, just leave it alone. Performing a quick format, what it does is it just sets up the file allocation table. It sets up the directory structure and all that of the hard drive, and we're going to look at directories in just a moment. But it sets all that up for you, but it doesn't go through and set up every single sector on the hard drive. And with a 2 terabyte partition, that could take some time. So what happens is if you say perform a quick format, it does all these minor, I shouldn't say minor, it does all these infrastructure things, and it doesn't actually format it until you actually start using that part of the hard drive. So it's kind of a nice feature. If you're wondering if your hard drive is damaged or something like that, you might want to turn that off. Also, one other thing I want you to notice is that if you pick NTFS, you can compress the drive. So that means everything you write to the drive, every file will actually get smaller. It'll automatically compress it, but that will also reduce the speed at which your hard drive runs. So we're going to leave this at exFAT, perform a quick format. I'm going to say next, and then finish. So Windows is going to work a little bit, and look at it, it's set it all up. So now if I double click on this PC, what do I have? I've got my C drive and I've got my empty 2 terabyte. It's actually, oh, I didn't really make it big enough. It only shows it as 185 gigabytes. Let's make sure. Yep, it's only 185 gigabytes, and so I made it too small. So let's go ahead and close this, and I'm going to go ahead and right click on this and delete it. Now you want to make sure if you delete it, there's no data on there that you need, because it will get rid of it. Okay, so let's try this again, and this time I want to make it new simple volume. They don't make this super easy, so let's kind of take some time here. So we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we want it to be 1900000. So 1900000. I think that's about half. And we're going to go ahead. Pretty much everything we did before. And if you notice, the graphic here isn't quite correct because it almost showed it as half even though it was very small. So now it's a lot bigger. It's 1,855 gigabytes or 1.8 terabytes. So if I go to this PC now, it's set up the way I want it, 1.81 terabytes. So that's awesome. And then 1.81 terabytes is free. So there's absolutely nothing on there. So now what if we want to make the other partition be for Linux? Well, if I'm going to right click on this and say new simple volume next, 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 I don't have the option of the Linux file system. Now Linux will read exFAT, it might read NTFS, but it can't write to it unless you install some special tools. So I want my drive to be useful for both. So we're going to do that on the Linux part. So you're going to be able to see how to do that on the Linux part with this hard drive. Okay. Now, one thing is that when I create a hard drive that's going to be usable on multiple operating systems, I always go to the operating system that owns the file system and create the partition there. On Linux, I've done that before, where I've created NTFS partitions, I've created exFAT partitions, and then when I go back to Windows, it says there's something wrong with this partition, I have to fix it. So, you know, Linux is open source, and as you see, Windows can't even do it. It can't even attempt to do it. Okay, so that's creating the partition. Now I'm going to close this, and there's nothing on here. If I double click on it, it's empty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on my C drive, and when I double click on my C drive, I see all kinds of folders. Now when you just double click on a drive, you're at what they call the root of the drive, and that is indicated by a backslash, not a forward slash, but a backslash. So that's the root. Now there is a command that makes this pretty easy. I'm going to bring up the command prompt. I'm going to type tree C:\\. So C: is the drive designator, and backslash is the root. It means start at the very beginning, the very top of the hard drive, and I'm going to put a vertical line more. And what that does is it'll display a page of text on the terminal, and then it'll wait for you to press enter to go to the next page. That's what the vertical line more does. So if I press enter, you can see right here we have our root folder, which is the backslash, and then right underneath that is the Irvine folder. Underneath Irvine is examples. Underneath examples is chapter 3. Underneath chapter 3 is 64-bit. Chapter 4 is under examples as well. So you can actually see the structure of the file system. So each one of these are folders, or what they call in really computer science terminology, directories. So that's how you organize your hard drive. So you can see we've got Irvine. Let's press the space bar. A lot of stuff under Irvine. Oh, there's Komenetsky functions. That's also under the root. And you can see there's Irvine, there's Komenetsky functions. You can see MSys64. That's over here on the tree. Home is actually underneath. Yeah, this is a little bit. So home is underneath M64, I believe. Yep. So the tree function has the ability to look at what the actual structure of the hard drive is, where, you know, when you open up your hard drive in Windows Explorer, it really doesn't show you the structure, it just shows you the directories. And you may have heard of these as called folders when actually they're directories. Now there's something else that we can do. I'm going to press Control-C to end this. Instead of sending it to more, I can do a greater than sign dir_tree.txt. And what that'll do is that'll do a directory tree and then send the data, send the output to a text file, so then I can actually look at that text file. Now there's a lot of directories on this hard drive, so this might take a little while. So let's let that finish and I'm going to show you how to look at that. Okay, so once it's done, it really didn't display anything. Now this is a huge Windows file system, so this took like 4 minutes on this computer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say notepad dir_tree.txt, and it brings up Notepad, and now you can just at your leisure go through and take a look at the entire directory tree. Now this just shows the directories in the folders. It doesn't actually show the files. You could actually specify an argument inside of the tree command under Windows to actually look at it. And there's also utilities out there that will show you your directory tree. I wish I could remember one. I actually used one on one of my laptops. So why am I showing you all this? Because it's important to understand that every folder that you've got, every file that you store on your hard drive, you put it in a directory, and that directory can be a nested directory inside of a nested directory inside of a nested directory, and you have to know that. Also, let's go ahead and close this. Let's take a look at our directory under a command line. So I'm going to change directory to \. That takes me all the way to the root folder of my hard drive. I'm going to do a dir, which means display the directory. And you can see all these different folders. I'm going to go into Windows. So I'm going to say change directory to Windows, dir, and there's a lot of stuff in there. And notice how you can see directories have the dir, but then files have a file size along with their name. And so now I'm not going to take you through the Windows directory because you really shouldn't be in there. So I'm going to go back to the root directory and dir. I'm going to change directory to users. And here's my user ID right here. Now notice there's a space in between Windows user. So I don't want to actually use this space. So when I actually change directory into a directory that has a space in it, I like to use a double quote. And now I'm in that directory. You can see that this shows my current directory. And I'm going to direct dir. And here's some things you're probably very familiar with. There's documents, there's downloads, there's that huge dir tree. It's 8 megabytes in size. So you can see all the different directories that make up your user folder. I'm going to delete that dir_tree.txt because I really don't need it anymore. So now if I do a dir, it's gone. So I'm going to go into Documents, change directory to Documents, dir, and there's my C++ folder, there's my Java, my MongoDB folder, my Python, my Qt, a bunch of different stuff. And those are folders that I use all the time. I'm going to change directory to Java. I'm going to change directory to test my SQL. And there's my files. So now I'm going to say notepad main class.java. And I can edit my files. And I can use any editor that way. So it's actually, I'm navigating the directory structure by going forward and backwards. So I'm going to go back to Java, so change directory ... means goes to the parent folder. So that took me back to Java. Change directory ... that took me back to Documents. Change directory ... took me back to Windows User. Now I change directory to Downloads. And I can see all the downloads that I have in that folder. So that is the basics of a file system on Windows. Let's take a look at Linux. Okay, we're back. Let's take a look at Linux. And I have this 4 terabyte hard drive connected to my Linux VM guest. And this is the same hard drive that I used in the Windows portion of this video. And it still has the 2 terabyte partition, the exFAT partition, now on it. Now if I go ahead and I double click on computer, let's see what we have here. We have the file system right here, which is the file system for the Linux. And let's take a look at this. So here's the Seagate 2 terabyte exFAT. It's got a system folder in it. I can go in here and create a document if I want. And now this is an exFAT partition, but I installed the exFAT drivers on Linux earlier when I installed the operating system. So I can do whatever I want with it. So this is a way that you can share a Windows computer hard drive with Linux or even a Mac, is by formatting it as exFAT. However, exFAT is nowhere near as sophisticated as NTFS or the Linux file systems. So let's say we're just going to put our Windows stuff on this 2 terabyte exFAT, but remember, this is a 4 terabyte hard drive. So how do we actually take the other 2 terabytes and we actually format it for Linux? Well, what I'm going to do down here, you can see the icon there. Not all Linux operating systems will show the external drive icons on the desktop, but Mint Linux does. So I'm going to go to Start and I'm going to type disks. And you see this app right here, Disks. This is a little app that actually shows the devices. So you can see right here I have an 86 gigabyte disk, which is actually the operating system disk for this Linux. Then we have a CD drive which has no media in it. There's my 4 terabyte. And you can see that I've got the 2 terabyte exFAT right here. And you can see this little stop, this little square, black square. That's a stop button. That means disconnected from the Linux. That means unmounted is the right terminology. But then you also see this free space right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the plus sign. It says how big do I want it? Well, you can specify any size you want. Maybe I want to only make it 1 terabyte. So I can put 1000 gigabyte free to the right of it. And let's just go ahead and do that just to play around. And I'm going to click next. And now it asks me for the name. I'm going to say, for Linux. And the default, and I don't know why Mint Linux does this, but the default is for use with NTFS. I like to click on internal disk for use with Linux system. ext4 is the name of the file system. And I can also password protect it. So the drive is encrypted. So nobody's going to be able to view it. It makes it very, very secure. Or if I want, I can click Other, click Next, and it'll ask me which file system I want to save it as. I can create it as exFAT, BTFS, Linux swap partition, which is a whole nother subject, XFS, which is the Linux file system. That file system is used for very big drives. So I don't want to do that. And by the way, you can't see this on Windows. Windows doesn't show you all these file systems unless you actually install something else. So I'm going to click on internal disk for use with Linux. I'm going to click Create. And there it is. So, but also notice that it created a little partition, a 2.1 megabyte partition in front of it, and it's still building the 1 terabyte exFAT. And this is a system partition. You never want to mess with that. For some reason, the hard drive, it needed to be aligned on a certain sector or a certain megabyte number, or there might even be system programs in there for this hard drive. So just leave those alone. So there you go. Now also notice this is 1 terabyte, that's 2.1 megabyte. They are not proportionally displayed in the graphics of this. But if I click on it, I can see some details about it. I can see the UUID, which is a unique device identifier that Linux uses. You can see the device name. Linux does not use C, D, E, F. It does not use those letters. It uses a device name that you can find in the DEV subdirectory, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute. It says that it's not mounted, which means I actually haven't stuck it on my system, can't really still use it yet. If I go to computer, I still don't really see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on it and I'm going to press the play button, and that mounts it. Now if we come over here, we can see for Linux. There's my for Linux hard drive. There's the 2 terabyte exFAT. There's my for Linux. I can also bring up a terminal, and I can go to the root of my main hard drive. And instead of dir, you type ls, and there's a folder here called media. Now, Mint Linux uses media. Other operating systems use this mnt folder. If I change directory to mnt, it shows HGFS, but it doesn't show the hard drive that I have mounted. On Mint Linux, you put that in media. I'm going to go to my user ID, because that is mounted as my user ID. And look what we have. We have the 2 terabyte exFAT, and we have the 1 terabyte for Linux. So this allows me, so instead of the C drive or the D drive, I have to go into media under my user ID, and I can go into those drives. Now, I'm going to change directory, and I'm going to put a double quote, 2 terabyte exFAT, and now I'm in that hard drive. And now I can see the same thing that I saw in the GUI, the same thing I saw on the File Explorer, which was right here. Okay, so that's how you move around. Now on Linux, you've got a completely different file system. If I say tree, and I'm going to say, I think it's depth 1. Is it, or is it depth 2? Oh, I didn't install tree. So I'm going to say sudo apt install tree. So by default, the tree program isn't installed on Linux, but look how easy it is to get it set up. So I'm going to say tree.depth1. Let's say, oh, I didn't specify a location, so it's tree-depth1. And boy, I sure don't have that right. And it's just going to go through, and to be fair, Linux has a huge file system as well. Let's go ahead and cut out of that. Now, I want to make sure I have it right. I guess I didn't have I think it might be L. So I'm going to say man tree. Man is the manual. And let me see, oh, it's -L level. How many levels down do I want to go? Okay, so I'm going to say tree / and Linux uses / instead of backslashes. I'm going to say -L1. So this shows all of the folders 1 level down from the root. You can see the root of the file system there. Now if I do -L2, you can see it's much larger. And there's a lot of files here. So instead of trying to scroll through this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say more, and we can see the file system a little bit clearer. So you can see the root up here. You can see bin is a directory underneath the root. Now, you notice this little arrow? That means that bin is actually a link to a real directory called user bin. So it's like a symbolic link. It's like a shortcut. So I can say change directory to bin. It actually takes me to user bin. So that's what that little thing means. There's the boot subdirectory, and underneath that are all these other subdirectories. We see the dev subdirectory, and we can see all these subdirectories or devices underneath that. A lot of stuff there. If I want, I could say 3, and it gets even worse. So this is actually a good exercise to see how directories are set up. But as I said, on Windows, you use something like C:\/ to get to the root. On Linux, you would say /, but you have to give it a device name. So as I said, that would be change directory to media, change directory to user ID. Instead of a drive letter, it has the name of the folder. Now, that's the disk application. Now, normally, like on most Linux operating systems, you have multiple ways of doing the same thing. So there's another program called gparted. Now, I haven't installed that, but it's very, very easy to install. And gparted gives you even more features. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say gparted. It asks me for my administrator password. And now I can drop down my devices, and we can see my 3.64 or 4 terabyte hard drive. And we can see that we've got the exFAT there, we've got the ext4 there. I want to create a partition there, and you can see it selected this way as well. So I'm going to say, I'm going to press this little create new partition. It asks me how big I want it to be. I want it to be the maximum size. And it asks me the file system. Look at all these different file systems that that gparted gives me. Now FAT16 and FAT32, those are from way back when DOS in the early 80s. It looks like I can even create a HFS Plus, which is a Apple Mac file system. A lot of stuff. JFS, that's a journaling file system that IBM created and is still used quite a bit. I could even create NTFS because I've actually created, or I've actually installed the NTFS drivers on my Linux. So a lot of stuff I could do. I can even make it unformatted, which means don't, create the partition. Let's do that. I'm going to create the partition, but it doesn't show any file system on it. Let's go ahead and press the check mark. Okay. And if I click on it, the file system shows unknown because I actually didn't install, I didn't format it to any specific file system. So I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to say format to, and then I can specify the file system I want to format it. I'm going to format it to NTFS, press the checkbox, apply. And now my hard drive actually has 3 partitions. It has the exFAT partition, which is the sharing with my Windows and with my external devices. I have my ext4, which is Linux only, and now I have NTFS. Now I haven't actually mounted that, so I'm going to right click on that. And yeah, this is one thing I'm not crazy about with gparted. I don't see a way to actually mount the file system. And disks is really great for that. But gparted has a lot of other features. So let's go ahead and go to that. And there's my NTFS. I'm going to go ahead and press the play button. And that mounts it. So now if I come over here, I can see my 1000 gig. Now I didn't label it very well. So I'm going to press the little eject button there. That unmounts it. Now I'm going to right click on that, or I'm going to click on it. I'm going to click this little gear. I'm going to see if I can change the name with disks. See, like I said, each program has a little bit different. I don't know if I want to say edit part. Oh, I can give it a name there. So I'm going to say NTFS 1 terabyte. Okay, now let's go ahead and mount it. It still isn't really showing the name there. So let's unmount it. And I'm going to go back to gparted. And by the way, you can do all this with command line. You don't have to use these GUI programs. So I'm going to go to here's my NTFS. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to name the partition. So I'm going to call this NTFS 1 terabyte. Oh, yeah, for some reason it's not showing that on here. I'm not sure why. Let's go ahead and start it. So it gives it this really strange name. If I go back to Linux user, you can see this really strange name. I'm not sure why it did that. It must be something special with NTFS on those Linux drivers, and I don't think I can rename it. Yeah, it's not going to let me do that. So, a little bit of issues, and that's why I really like to, if it's NTFS or exFAT, I do it on Windows. If it's Linux, I do it on, and it's ext, I do it on Linux. If it's Apple, I do it on Apple. So I've got a hard drive here now with 3 partitions, each with different usages. Let's say if I want to reformat this to something else, I can click the gears. I can say format the partition. Let's see if I want to make it for FAT. So I'm going to call this FAT2. Next. And now it should redo it. And there it is. Now it's FAT2. So, but remember, whenever you format a partition, it erases everything. So that's the overall general description of file systems on your hard drive with partitions and all that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about actually creating files in your program. See you at that video.